All right, degeneration bets works like this. You got to find something that's deep down on the board, way off on the edges of the board that people may not even know exists. And Kate, you may have outdone me. This may be the most degenerate bet that's ever been placed in degeneration bets history. This is fine quality work by you. Give me your first one.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to hit you with some snooker. Have you ever heard of snooker?
Snooker. Yeah. Is it snooker or snooker? Sure, I've heard of it.
I don't
know how to pronounce it, but I've heard of it.
I thought it was snooker, and then I heard someone say when I was Googling it 2 hours ago, because that was the first time I had heard it, I heard it pronounced snooker. I'm taking Jamie Clark plus 130 to win three-way. So no overtime, no tie at the end of this. I'm going to take plus money for Clark to beat Joe Perry in snooker this afternoon. However you want to pronounce it.
Snooker, however you want to say it. I like the bet. I like it because there's solid research done there, Kate. That's what degeneration bets is all about. We find something strange that we've maybe never bet on before. We do a little bit of research, even if it's 2 hours before the bet, and we nail it. I'm counting on it now. Jamie Clark plus 130 over Joe Perry. All right, I've got one for you because I can't believe you dug up two of these. I'll let you get your rugby bet in a minute. I've got one for you. Premier League Lacrosse this weekend. Oh, it's a big one in the PLL. The Water Snakes against the Whip Dogs, or the Water Dogs against the Whip Snakes. It doesn't matter. What matters is one of these two teams. I think it's the Water Dogs. Yeah, the Water Dogs, dominant in the face-off circle through the first few weeks of the PLL season, controlling the circle and therefore controlling possession, which means I'm in on the Water Dogs at minus 115 on the money line over the Whip Snakes Friday night in the PLL. I don't know. I think you can watch it on ESPN Plus. But as I mentioned earlier with the Summer League, sometimes I just set them and forget them, and I'll check it the next day. I think that I'm probably not staying up to watch the Water Dogs and Whip Snakes on Friday night. But at the very least, there's my bet on it. Water Dogs over the Whip Snakes, minus 115.
I think we need to get better names in the NFL, like Water Dogs and Whip Snakes. Those are fantastic names. Why do all these like underrated leagues get all the good names? I would love an NFL team named the Whip Snakes.
You're right about that. We need to get more creative. Do you want some of these names? I have all of them here. Those are the two best. It happen to be the two best names. Okay, we've got the Water Dogs, we've got the Whip Snakes, the Archers, which is pretty simple. Okay. The Redwoods, which I would kind of question naming a lacrosse team after stationary objects because you've got to move a lot in lacrosse, but whatever, here nor there. The Cannons, okay, that's solid. The Chaos, I'm not always a fan of singular nicknames, but okay.
Yeah.
The Atlas, that one I'm kind of questioning. And then we've got the Chrome. Yeah, the Chrome, at naming your team after an internet browser doesn't really do it for me. Like the LA Explorers or the New York Firefoxes, sorry, I'm not leaning in on them. Like I'm leaning in, not leaning in on the Chrome, you know?
First five under, I think that's a great look. I'm going to look towards the Nationals. I know that the American League has won the last 9, and it's not exactly great handicapping to say the Nationals are due, but I think that their position players are better than what we're seeing in the National League because there's no Mike Trout. There's no Ohtani. At least I guess he is batting. No Aaron Judge. So I think some of the National League bats might be a little bit better tonight. So I'm going to take a flyer on them. I got them yesterday at plus money. It's now even, or at least minus 110 on both sides. So you're not really getting a huge edge there, but I like the National League to come through.
You mentioned Ohtani. Without him worrying about pitching, without him having to think about that at all, I think that actually presents an opportunity. You talk about looking for plus money spots, and there's a parlay I found this morning. If I asked you if you thought Shohei Ohtani and Luis Arraez would both get a hit in this All-Star game, what would you say? I mean, give me a percentage chance. Yeah, there you go. That's an official percentage. Hell yeah is an official 100%. So Ohtani and Arraez to both record hits in this game, you parlay those two together, it's plus 127 right now, the one spot I found it. So by all means. That's a perfect place to find plus money and count on something happening. Okay, we're parlaying it, so we've got to have a couple dominoes fall. But that's another one that I really like to maybe knock out of the way in the first 2 or 3 innings.
With what we saw, I know it's a completely different, coaching staff and everything, and quarterback. Carolina was just such a mess last year that they kind of just left a sour taste in my mouth, and that's not a very good reason to be handicapping in under or anything like that. It just feels like it's going to take this team, this organization, a little bit of time to turn around. So 8 wins, but to your point of the weakest division in all of the NFL this year. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned that they play Atlanta the first week. That could easily be a win for them. And maybe that, gives Bryce Young some confidence right off the bat, and they kind of start rolling from there. So I can get on board with your point. I still am not going to bet it. I'll give you that.
You still think I'm crazy. That's okay. Say it, Kate.
I do. I still think you're crazy. I still think you're crazy.
That's why we're supposed to have these conversations. If you think I'm nuts, you say, Chris, you're little today. And that's, but I see, maybe I'm putting too much stock in the schedule, right? Like, again, I look at it and see, okay, we've got 6 games against the inferior NFC South. We've got 4 games against a really bad AFC South, too. I mean, who's going to come out of that division? So you're telling me 10 games on Carolina's schedule are against teams that are kind of right there on their level, that have no idea what they are or what they're supposed to be necessarily. To me, if you just win half of those, okay, we've made it to 5-5. Even if you go 4-6 in those 10 games, all right, we're 4-6 with another 7 games to compute. You win 3 of those, we're getting real close to the number there all of a sudden. Maybe, again, I'm putting too much stock in the schedule, but that's where – and maybe too much stock in Bryce Young as well, because I do have question marks about him, especially once he starts to get knocked around because of his build. Does he miss time in the middle of the year? And then what's that Carolina offense look like, especially if, let's say, he hits the ground running and he's got a little bit of a groove, and Carolina is starting to see some positives early on from this revamped offense. But then, again, because Bryce Young is not exactly built like the big strapping quarterbacks we're accustomed to, he does miss a couple weeks because he takes a nasty hit. Then that sort of sets everything off the rails, and all of a sudden we're talking about Carolina, at least in my estimation, is more of that 6 to 7 win team that you and everybody else seems to have them pegged as.